Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O. Movie Reviews podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson. I'm here today at Rose City Coffee Co. to talk about the best films of 2017 in a part one of a two-part series, and I'm joined by some of my wonderful colleagues, starting with the man who was last heard on this podcast comparing Luke Skywalker and Martin Luther. It's Patrick Belin. How are you, Patrick?
I'm not too bad, just getting over a cold, but here I am again, talking about movies as usual.
And ready to talk about some of the best and brightest, I gather.
Yep.
And also here we have Jim Newman. Jim, I know you had some trials getting over here, but you're here and you look ready.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, but like Patrick, I am in recovery mode from a cold. But thank God, this is like my first day where I feel like a human again. So that's a good thing.
Well, I know of no better healing tonic than talking about Gold Star Cinema.
Yes.
And we are indeed talking about the best of the year today. We're going to do a format similar to what we did last year. Each of us have picked our top 5 favorite movies of 2017. We're going to talk about them going from number 5 to number 1. And I apologize in advance for the number of times in this podcast that I'll be saying number 1 and number 2. Get over it, audience. But we're going to do this, and I'm excited because there were a lot of great movies this year, and I have to say it's a pretty great year when Christopher Nolan makes a movie and it isn't number 1 on my list. Oops, did I just give something away? Didn't mean to do that. But we're going to dive right in, starting with Patrick. What was your 5th favorite movie of the year?
Oh, if it can only be that easy. I'll have to start with a disclaimer saying that this was probably one of my more difficult years to put together a list like this. And in fact, I actually put together 2 lists, 2 top 5s. I have a top 5 of films that I think are the best films, and then because I can't stop at 5, I put together another list that's my top 5 favorites that stuck with me, that I remember this year by. So I'm going to have to go with my top 5 favorites. So that said, number 5 on my list will have to be Mother, the Aronofsky's new one. And this is a great place to say that I think 2017 has a lot of controversial films. Mother is definitely one of them. I think a lot of people were expecting Aronofsky to have a pretty big comeback after his big screen flop with Noah.
Oh, what didn't you like about the rock Transformers and Russell Crowe trying to stab a baby with a knife?
Yeah.
I don't know. What's your problem, Patrick?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there was a lot of expectations going into Mother, and when I saw it, I had no idea what to expect. I kind of stayed away from all the media and the hype around it. So, but I came away from Mother, and this was a really good movie. There was a lot going on, a lot to think about. I thought it was really well done. Very effective movie. So there's my number 5.
We had quite a rollicking podcast about this movie, as I'm sure you remember. One of the things that really struck me about the discussion was everybody had a different interpretation, and the movie is kind of broad and mythical enough that it lends itself. You, I remember, talked about the aspect of the movie being a critique of stardom, of celebrity. Do you feel the same way today? Does it still strike you the way it struck you the first time?
Sure. Honestly, I haven't seen it a second time since, but going back to the first time that we saw it, that's what I'm going back to, and yeah, it's been a couple months since we've seen it now,
sure.
But I haven't seen anything about it that would change my mind about it. It still sits in my mind the same way. So,
It slipped away, and I didn't see it, but I have in my mind a question about Jennifer Lawrence's role.
Mm-hmm.
Is it her movie? Did she dominate? Did she make it what it was, or is it more an ensemble kind of?
No, it was hers, definitely. She owned the role. I think she knocked it out of the park. That's easily the best Jennifer Lawrence that I've seen in any other.
So
other.
that in itself, I would say
that in itself is worth the price of admission. What?
I will add though, like I mean, it's I agree absolutely, not an ensemble movie. I mean, Javier Bardem is delightfully lackadaisical and menacing and horrible in it, but it's everything is from Jennifer Lawrence's perspective. She does dominate the movie. Although I will say that if this movie has a star, it's Darren Aronofsky.
Yep.
I mean, it is such a director's movie in terms of the way it's shot and the way the action is constructed, which is part of why I am also a big fan of it. But you were going to say something.
Well, I think months later, thinking about it now in hindsight, I would say my biggest takeaway from it is how I love how it challenges audiences' expectations. If anything, it shatters a lot of it.
Yeah.
And having read a lot of commentary and analysis of it, I think a lot of people just didn't really know what to expect or know what to think about it. And that's one of the things that I love about it, is that a lot can be said about it. There's a lot of ambiguity between the lines.
Yeah.
And it can mean a couple of things, like you were thinking of it in terms of an environmental critique, and I was thinking of it in terms of like a religious allegory. I think it can be that those are both very valid, and it's just a type of movie that gets the audience thinking, and it challenges the audience, and that's what I like about it. And it's a shame that it just kind of like came and went.
Well, I before we move on, one more thing I want to say is I love this movie, and in fact, I may or may not be talking about it a little later in this podcast. I love it so much, but I was really dismayed by the reaction to it. Not the fact that a lot of people didn't like it, because I perfectly understand, why people wouldn't like it. I mean, it's got sexual assault, it's got cannibalism, it's got one of the most masterfully depressing endings you'll ever see. I mean, it's quite horrifying to witness. But what I was dismayed by was the fact that people would say things about it like, if you have to Google a movie to understand it, then it's a failure. And it's like, well, that's a totally different way of looking at cinema. Like, I don't see cinema as, you walk into a theater, you absorb something, and then all your questions are answered. I think ideally, it's a quest. It's a journey, I mean, and I think that's true with really complex films and really simple films. I was just watching Return of the Jedi the other day for the millionth time, and there were things that struck me about that movie that hadn't struck me before, even though I've lost count of how many times I've seen it. And I think that's what cinema should be. I mean, I say on with the Googling, because I love putting stuff in there.
Well, to me, I think it's just kind of being a part of a conversation. I mean, I'm not when I Google analysis and commentary, it's because it's the same thing as sitting around with you guys and finding out what you guys think.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're just trying to see what your peers are thinking about it as well.
That's why I don't like the idea of people trying to shut down the conversation before it even begins.
No, right.
No, I mean, it's you're saying you don't want to learn more. I mean, if it intrigued you, you don't want to enmesh yourself in all of it. That's crazy.
Well, let's learn something from you, Jim. What is your fifth favorite film of 2017?
I would say, and I think it's a lot of work to watch it. It reminds me of The Revenant in its broad scope, and that is Dunkirk. I was enamored by its ability to take you on a really long, drawn-out, thinly plotted exploration of something like 3 or 4 days as they're trying to evacuate a beach in France. and the minutia that it goes through, and how some of the minutia, such as whether when you finally sneak onto a boat to cross the channel back to England, and everybody on that boat is celebrating that they have made it, and they are in one of the holds celebrating, and the doors are closed, but there's one guy who does not go into the room where the party is going on, and it turns out that's for a very good reason, because the boat capsizes, and it's just one of the ways in which this movie comes up and bites you in the ass with the realities of what can happen in an unpredictable situation such as a war. And the beauty of that movie is how it takes enough time between incidents to lull you. If you're not alert, you can say that the movie is boring, but it isn't if you're aware that there are snakes everywhere. And I mean, Christopher Nolan is brilliant because he has that confidence in himself to work at putting that on film and taking his time to do it. So that's my generalized take. I'm sure that people saw it and thought it was boring, just like they did with The Revenant. But the richness is there. That beautiful scene towards the end of the movie when the pilot is trying to run his fighter out of gas so he can safely land it on the beach, and it goes back and forth, and everybody's cheering him. But you don't know if he's going to succeed or not. And the kindness, the actor Mark Rylance is, I don't know if he's a star. He's probably the star of this movie.
He's a star to people like us. Like,
real
hardcore cinephiles.
I mean, that guy radiates this kindness and this heroism, which is awe-inspiring in that context, because he is not a soldier. He's just a guy in England that owns a boat. And by God, if he can take that boat and save some people who are in need, then by God, he's going to do it. And I loved that Nolan chose him, and I love that, for whatever reason, he elicited, or Mark Rylance gave, a beautiful performance.
Oh, yes.
Completely absolutely. No, it's, I mean, this movie, I mean, you know, there's so much has been said about it, and yet there's still so much more to be said. I mean, it's brilliant. It rewards multiple viewings. I absolutely adore it, and I love, Jim, that especially that you drew attention to the scene where the one guy stays on the outside of the boat to, you know, because he knows, you know, hey, we're not home free. You know, we might still need a way to get out of this thing, and turns out he's right, and turns out that's what saves him and saves a lot of other people. And just the idea of like how, you know, we don't know anything about a lot of these characters. We don't know if they have wives or girlfriends back home. We don't know about their parents. You know, we just know them in this moment. But because those moments are so well observed, you feel like you understand them and their thought process, and that's why I think this is, you know, like all of Nolan's films, I think this is very much a humanist film, you know. I mean, even though the drama is kind of logistical to a certain degree, but that's part of the thrill too, that it's like, you know, the story is, oh, they have to get to this boat, they have to get back to the beach, they get into another boat, you know. You can map it all out in your head, which I think is a sign of great filmmaking.
Well, and the humanity of the characters, it's simply one guy at the beginning of the movie. His main goal is to take a crap. I mean, he really is in that position, which is, everybody knows, very human, and the circumstances prevent it. So there's just that added tension that comes to all of us. And then when you add the layer on layer on layer on top of that, maybe that is part of Nolan's secret, that he manages to touch humanity a lot of different levels. I mean, there is a high-ranking officer trying to make sure that nobody sneaks on the boat, and then there are underlings crawling through the rafters of this walkway that is loading the ships, trying to find a way onto it. And that, to me, is another kind of humanity, you know, trying to circumvent the rule of the armed forces in order to survive.
Yeah.
Of course, that kind of thing is beautiful. It's all, on that level, a kind of game, but one with horrendous consequences for those who lose, you know. I mean, I have the feeling that humor and terror and grim outcomes mesh together often in a war situation, and it felt like that movie captured that to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think that's a good point to segue to my fifth favorite film of the year, which, not to be a copycat, I swear to God, I picked this, months ago, but it is in fact Dunkirk. I mean, since we already went to it, I won't say too much, but like you, Jim, I really respond to the humanity of the movie. You know, people often describe Christopher Nolan as a cold director or a head-over-heart director. I could not disagree more. I mean, I think this is a really beautiful film, and I think it makes you understand what these guys are feeling. Not that I feel I understand what war is, having seen it, but these particular characters, you feel their desperation. You feel the dark side of that. How winning is totally not an option in this movie. It's only a matter of survival, and to do what it takes to survive. A lot of them are willing to sell each other out, and I think there's a Lord of the Flies aspect of the movie that's very powerful, and how you see how this conflict is stripping away the humanity of these characters, and yet even that, Christopher Nolan finds these wondrous moments where characters rise above that, through these unbelievable acts of sacrifice, whether it's a young kid telling a soldier a comforting lie to spare him pain, whether it's Kenneth Branagh's character staying behind to, help these French soldiers who until now in the movie have been ignored for convenience sake, or especially, as you alluded to, Jim, that final bit with Tom Hardy in the plane, knowing he doesn't have enough fuel to get back going on anyway, and the calm acceptance at the end when he's captured because he did what he had to do, and there's something really powerful about that. And even then, Nolan doesn't surrender too much to triumphalism or these guys redeemed the day. Even then, you end with the young kid Tommy, played by Finn Whitehead, alone on the train, turning the page of the newspaper, wondering what the hell is going to happen next, And Manohla Dargis wrote in the New York Times about this movie. She made a great point, which she said it closes the distance between yesterday's fights and today's. And she said that scene is a reminder that the fight against fascism continues. And that's why I think this is both a great history lesson, but it's also a movie for this moment, because the fight certainly goes on, and I think the movie speaks to that.
Mm-hmm.
I may or may not talk about Dunkirk in this list. I'll save more thoughts for that.
In that case, I think we should move on to your number 4 pick. Patrick, lay it on us.
My number 4 pick is another movie that just kind of came and went. And it's not a U.S. movie. It is The Square, which was mostly in Swedish with some English. I really liked it. Well, personally, I'm just a big fan of dark comedies. I wasn't expecting I wasn't sure what to expect with this movie. The trailer made it look like it was going to be a lot more comedic, but it wasn't actually. In terms of dark comedy, I would have to say it leans more towards the dark than the comedy, but it still has some humorous moments. Have either of you guys seen it?
No,
No.
I still have not.
Okay.
Tell us more.
What's it called again?
The Square.
The
Won
Square.
the Palme d'Or at Cannes.
Oh, okay.
This is another movie that I thought maybe a lot of people didn't quite understand, because I think the buzz around it was that it's a critique of the contemporary art world. I found that true, but in a superficial way. There's definitely some of that in The Square, but if you dig a little deeper, and this is why I thought it was brilliant, is because it was not a not so subtle dig at this thing we call political correctness in society, and the film explored that idea and critiqued it in a slightly humorous way, and generally it was very well done, well put together. I enjoyed it, obviously.
Could you talk about that idea of it being a critique at, perceived political correctness? Like, is there a scene that particularly stands out to you?
Right. The title, the Square, refers to this art exhibit in this make-believe Swedish art museum. Supposedly, the square is like the installation itself is really simple. It's just like a square in the courtyard, and the caption on it is, "This is where like peace, love, and happiness happens," or something along that nature. And there's a controversy. There's a part of the plot. I'm trying to remember now. It's been a couple of months. Anyways, the art museum is trying to sell this new exhibit called the Square. When I think about the Square, I feel like there was just more than a few layers of complexity going on there that I could talk about it more, and it would be easier to write about it than to talk about it.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
About it? I mean, one thing like that came up in a lot of the reviews I read was like they were, and this plays into something you said. Like let me revise that. You said that it's not really a critique of the art world.
It is, but in a very surface way.
Okay.
I would say that the film gets deeper, and which is why it made my top 5 list.
Okay. Well, yeah, because, and the interesting thing is, a lot of the reviews would say things like, like, oh, the art world, this rich, affluent world that's very superficial, like, that's not a very hard target to hit.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're saying, like, the people who are saying that, they're the ones missing the target because it's only about that on the surface? Is that?
Right, because of course the story revolves around the contemporary art world, and of course it's also being formed into dark comedy. So I guess they're kind of clinging on to the comedic bits, but
Sure.
they're not seeing the deeper critique, which is what I said earlier. This critique of like political correctness in society, which is a little hard because it's embedded into the plot as well. It's difficult for me to talk about it, and I'll also try to make sense of it. I would have to write about it, I think.
Hey, that's
a measure of how good it is.
Yeah, I was thinking the same things. The best movies are the ones that leave you like, what the heck did I just see?
It's one of those. To me, it's that one of those films of the year that just kind of flies under a lot of people's radars, I think.
Sure.
And if you focus on the surface critique, then it's gonna be easily dismissed, I think, and which is, I think, a shame. I think maybe I should write about it.
You should. I think it sounds like you've got an itch to scratch there. So
there you go. I mean, that's my number 4.
What's your number 4 pick, Jim?
Well, my number 4 is 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri, and I don't know if I need to say a lot about it because it might well be that you guys are including that later. I don't know, but
I have to confess, I still need to see that one. So.
Oh my God!
Have at it.
Yeah, the fact is, I think that one of the strong points of that movie is the confidence with which it is written, because it takes a premise that is just exquisitely thin and fragile, that this woman has become angry at the local sheriff's department because her daughter was murdered and there has been no progress in the case. So she takes 3 abandoned billboards on a side road and renovates them and explicitly attacks the sheriff by name for not doing enough. And what happens is the town goes more or less crazy. Frances McDormand is very good at playing flinty, tough, humorous women, and she is a delight to watch in this role. I'm not saying that it's a perfect movie. I think it's somewhat too long, but the richness of the lines, the richness with which it is put together, and one scene to me really comes to mind, and at a certain point she comes home. She has a surviving son, and of course she lost her daughter some months earlier. The son is home with the town priest, and the priest believes that he has sufficient authority that he can lecture Frances McDormand about these signs and say that it's a really bad idea to do this. But the way she, in just a few words, deconstructs that authority of him specifically and of the church generally is masterful, and it's done with great wit and the verve and spleen that you could expect that woman to put on screen. So that kind of excerpt from the movie is the kind that if I wanted to have my favorite scenes of every movie I'd ever seen, that is one, when she's addressing this priest, because she does it so beautifully. But there are lots of other good things. Sam Rockwell is in it. Woody Harrelson is up for some awards. I don't know. Is he up for a Golden Globe? He's up for the SAG.
I don't know. I mean, I know Sam Rockwell.
Woody Harrelson's been nominated for the Screen Actors Guild.
Okay.
Maybe some others. But the fact is, I loved him in this movie. There is a warmth to his performance that is phenomenal. Look, in many ways, there's a richness. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is well worth an evening to be taken to that place where these phenomenal humans are. And I don't remember the name of the guy who wrote and directed the movie.
Martin McDonagh.
Okay, well, the guy is amazing.
Are you? I was curious. Like, are you a fan of like In Bruges or his?
Yes.
plays?
He's the guy that did him.
Yeah.
Man, that same richness of character and a certain ominous undertone of threat that he manages to weave in with the humor and the affection. He's really good at understanding those dimensions to humanity. I didn't realize, I guess maybe at one time I'd known that he wrote In Bruges, but yeah, this is a worthy successor to that movie, for sure.
You know, I mean, definitely it seems like, as I said, I haven't seen it yet, but obviously, you know, vigilantism of a certain kind, like being a part of the plot, like, you know, that's obviously, you know, that's a universal theme, you know, stories about outsiders, about, you know, anyone going up against the proverbial system is a powerful thing, but
yes.
But do you think, you know, a story like that is particularly resonant now, like in a time where it's, you know, harder than ever to trust authority figures for a lot of reasons?
I would say that Frances McDormand's performance makes it look easy to be a strong woman. But when you think about the movie, you realize that it's cost her essentially every friend that she has in town. And it's also alienated her son. And so it is extraordinarily expensive for this woman to stand alone as she is, and yet the psychic pain of losing her daughter. And there's a scene the last time, in fact, that the mom saw her daughter, and it was not a pleasant interchange before she was brutally murdered.
I think I read about that. Yeah, in the New Yorker.
So
it's not pleasant.
No, and so the guilt that she feels is unquestionably a motivator. But there is a good deal of leavening comedy, I would say, in the movie. I mean, the absurdity of the central conceit of these three billboards is continually amusing and played really well, just the way they have it set up. Mm-hmm. Those
Anthony Lane, I remember saying, like, three billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, it sounds like a Walker Evans photograph.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly, yeah, with the sunlight hitting in a certain way.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I left that theater feeling really good. The friend that I saw it with was delighted, and he isn't normally by movies, and nor does he seem to think about movies as I do. You were discussing earlier how much you love them and how much they feed you. I wouldn't say that's true of my friend, but he liked it a lot.
Hope he's not listening. Well, I will move on to my number 4. This is going to be an interesting one to get into because I know Patrick is a fan of it and Jim is not. I'm a fan of it because it's number 4 on my list. It's James Gray's The Lost City of Zed.
Oh yeah.
I'm a big fan of Gray. I think he's one of the best directors working today. He did The Immigrant. He did We Own the Night. He did one of my all-time favorite films, Two Lovers, with Joaquin Phoenix and Gwyneth Paltrow and Isabella Rossellini. But this is a new phase in his career because it's the first historical epic he's made. It's about Colonel Percy Fawcett. I think he was a colonel. Around the turn of the century, he was from Britain. He went and explored the Amazon, came to believe that there was a hidden city down there, and he returned to the jungle time and time again. And the movie explores that conflict. And what I love about this film is it really immerses you in this quest and the idea that this is a guy from, repressed part of society, and he finds freedom and excitement in seeking out the unknown and going into this world that he's never encountered before, and being immersed in the sights and sounds and the thrill of trying for years and years and years to answer this question: where is this place? And we see how that haunts him, how seductive that is to him. One of my favorite scenes is when he's gone off to fight in World War I, and this kind of seer type woman, tells his fortune and says, your soul will never be quiet until you find this place. Even in the midst of war, even in the midst of battle, that's all he can think about. It's drawing him in. And of course, in real life, it was revealed that there was in fact a lost city down there, but no one knows if Fawcett ever found it. He vanished on his final expedition. And I love that the movie, rather than trying to imagine what happens to him, simply allows him to do what he did in real life, which is to vanish, and leaves us with these questions. And cinema inevitably is a somewhat literal art form because we're going to see images, projected on a screen. There's truth in what we're seeing. It really was captured. But at the same time, I think The Lost City of Zed is a reminder of how essential mystery is to cinema, and how a question unanswered, in this case, what the heck happened to this guy, is in some ways just as magical as a great answer. And I love how at the end of the film it just ends with his wife walking away, and she too is obsessed, wondering where he is, and we're left with that feeling of being enticed. And that's why I find it to be a very addictive experience watching it. I'm excited to go back because it's been a while since I saw it.
Yeah.
There you have it, The Lost City of Zed.
Patrick, did you see it?
Yes, I did.
And?
I share a lot of what Ben has to say about it. For me, it hit home a little bit. I don't know, what I what I attached to most was this theme of ambition and how ambition can be really, really so seductive and consuming that you don't see yourself sinking deeper into the quicksand because you're so focused on getting that prize. And I like how it ended with mystery as well. The other thing that I attached to is the way it was shot. It was almost like a black and white film with color.
I think the shooting style is so beautiful. Just the darkness and the texture of the colors.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
There's that shot of like in the Amazon, like a tree at night, and just the silhouette of the trunk, like reaching up into the night sky. I mean, it's very painterly. And that's actually true of Gray's other films.
It's like the way it was shot. It was a little dreamlike.
Yes.
Like it kind of tried to put the audience into the main character's shoes. Like you're so fixated on this that you can't look away.
That's a great way to describe it.
But then there's no great answer to the mystery. It just kind of leaves you hanging.
Yeah.
And like you said, you referenced the scene with his wife kind of just wandering off. So that's what I recall from it.
Jim, I know you were not a fan, as I mentioned. You had a number of issues, but I know especially you didn't like Charlie Hunnam as Fawcett.
No, and I hear you guys talking. It's clear that you loved it, and my first instinct is to defer and kind of offer a mea culpa that I didn't watch it right. But I'm not going to...
I don't know if there's ever a right or wrong way to
Well,
watch
but
things.
still, you were talking about the richness of the movie, and I didn't feel any of that. But I'm just going to outline the things that are left with me that are utterly critical and negative about the movie. Number one, I thought that they tried to put too much in the movie. They followed his life for a really long period of time, and so it gets to be episodic. He's home, he's not home. His wife is going to miss him. Yes, now he has kids. They're going to miss him. So there is that kind of turmoil going on. And meanwhile, Charlie Hunnam isn't really aging like a normal person. Maybe it's my history with him. I really liked him when he was playing a bad boy role in the gangs of South London or wherever it was, and he was a tough guy. So now he's playing a different kind of character, a person with a good deal of intellect, and I perhaps simply didn't buy him in that role. But in general terms, I was left with a kind of who cares, there's no resolution to this. He was an obsessive human being, and at no point did I ever share in what you guys are describing as the richness that you got from it. Now, it might be that a mea culpa is appropriate here, and I should say that I watched it on a fairly small screen lying in bed, and maybe I was just not paying enough attention. But again, it really was episodic. It crammed a lot into a little space, and I thought, if you guys had edited this better and shown me something more substantive about who the guy actually is, then I would have liked the movie better, because I didn't feel like at the end of it, this mystery man wasn't someone that I understood. Whereas in The Revenant, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, you know what he's motivated by. He's motivated by love for his son. But I did not understand what drove Fawcett into the jungle.
Could I interject something?
Sure.
Well, I think that's so interesting, because I feel like I really trace it back to the scene where he's fussing about oh, I don't have any medals on my shirt, and I trace it all back to like insecurity. I mean, I think this is a guy, and And Charlie Hunnam has this kind of this sort of like preening, needy vibe, like a guy who needs to be loved, like a guy who's like, look, I'm tall, I'm here, I'm big, and I feel that like he really like goes on this quest like out of ego and to fulfill that. And,
Yeah.
But I love this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. So what I gather is that when they established his character arc in the beginning, that wasn't very effective to you, because I thought it was very effective. Like when they were in after the hunting scene and they were in the ballroom scene, whatever.
Yes.
I thought that established the beginning of his arc pretty effectively.
I really might have missed it. I mean, because I was left saying, wow, people are talking about this movie? But then I have that reaction to...
Hey, I get it. I have that with a lot of movies. And that's why we're here. That's why I love criticism. We can see the same exact thing and get totally different things.
In fact, I know we got to kind of stay on subject, but there are other movies that I would just like to snipe at because they made me mad, And anyway, let's go on.
Patrick, you ready for you to talk about your number 3 choice?
Number 3 choice. Let me pull this up again, just because, like I said earlier,
It's not Dunkirk, is it?
No. Just to remind again, I have the shadow list, right? So my number 3 here is Blade Runner 2049.
Ooh.
Have we talked about it yet?
No, we haven't brought it up yet.
Oh, okay.
You get to be the first one to run some blades.
So I would have to admit that I'm not a huge fan of the original Blade Runner. I've seen it 3 times. I've seen it twice in the theater, the original Blade Runner, and there's just something about it that I've never really attached to. I don't know if maybe it's because of Ridley Scott's direction and trying to get me into this world, or I'm not a huge fan of Harrison Ford's Deckard in that movie. But 2049, I thought Villeneuve actually. I know this is going to anger a lot of Blade Runner fans, but I would have to say that Villeneuve did a better job of bringing me into that world than Ridley Scott did.
You're not angering me. I feel exactly the same way.
So that's my take on that. It's just overall a very well done movie. I think I've said this before. It's probably my favorite futuristic dystopian movie since Children of Men, and that's a very big thing to say because I think that was a very well done movie, and it's been my top dystopian movie for a very long time. And for a film to come and knock that out of its top spot, I think is a pretty big ask. So I think it deserves my number 3 spot.
I don't want to say too much because I may or may not be talking about this movie later on as well. But it's such a beautiful film, and you mentioned not as being as big a fan of the original, and also of Harrison Ford's Deckard character.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Like Deckard strikes me as like a very cold character. He's the first one is really a movie about state-sanctioned murder, and the guy who's tasked with doing this, and that being the nature of the thing, it's a little bit hard to invest in him. You feel a distance, and I feel like the way 2049 is told, the way Gosling's story plays out as Kay, the new Blade Runner, I feel like you're in his skin, you're in his soul, and that makes the difference, that.
Plus the fact that Kay was a replicant himself, I think adds just so much more complexity to that character.
Yeah. That very first scene when Dave Bautista's character says, how does it feel killing your own kind? That is, that's the hook. Right there, that's what makes this movie special.
It just made me care more about Kay than about Deckard, unfortunately.
I agree. Yeah.
But with that said, I thought Harrison Ford's reprisal of Deckard in this was really well done.
No, he's brilliant. Yeah.
There you go.
I'll just say one more thing before we moved on. someone pointed out that just the moment when Harrison Ford, utters the name Rachel in this movie, utters the name of his lost love, just he turns that one name into a really powerful moment. And this movie, with the other actors as well, is a great example of how you can do so much with like very minimal dialogue. It's very much about faces and feelings, and that's a big part of why I love it. Jim, what's your
I
favorite
didn't
film
see
of the
it,
year?
so I have just one question for you guys, and that is: is there a really quotable line like, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. I've seen starships on fire off the shoulder of Orion." Whatever it goes. That amazing scene by the replicant in the first movie. Is there anything like that? Is there some pivotal moment like that?
Here's what I think. I'm saying this with the benefit of less hindsight than I have about the original.
True.
But there are a lot of lines that stand out in this movie, and one of them is Jared Leto plays the villain, who is a Tyrell type figure, but quite a bit more sadistic than Tyrell. And he says this. He has this line where he says, he's now I remember. He's talking about how, using his resources, he took humanity to 9 worlds. And he says, 9. A child can count to 9. We should own the stars. And just, I loved that line because it's exactly what you'd expect this kind of a corporate guy who masks his greed and mythopoesis, to say. It's such a great, illustration of hubris, and there's probably better lines in the movie that I'm not remembering, but that one I thought was especially striking.
Well, I would really like to be Rutger Hauer in the remake because of, and all these things will be lost in time like tears in rain.
Time to die. And he wrote that himself.
He did?
Yeah.
It was an ad lib, or? Well,
I think he wrote it the night before, and it was hey, really.
Well, it is so great, man.
Jim, what's your third favorite film of the year?
I am surprised by my own choice here in a way. I certainly did not like the title of the movie because it evokes a negative, which is The Big Sick.
I just have to say really quick, I had a hell of a time convincing my family to see that movie because I would say, hey, we should really see The Big Sick. It's getting a lot of buzz, and they'd be like, The Big Sick? Ew, and it's and I didn't understand at the time. I was like, what? But everyone was saying this at Sundance, and in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Have you seen it too, Patrick?
Yes,
Okay. Well, I was in awe of that movie. Now, I don't know if people know who Kumail Nanjiani is. He is in an HBO series about the computer
Silicon
world,
Valley, right?
Silicon Valley, and he plays a comic, somewhat one-dimensional character. And on the poster for The Big Sick, he has kind of a smirk on his face. So I wasn't going into this movie expecting the depth that I saw on screen. And indeed, I felt envious that this man was able to put one of his personal experiences and one of the probably great trials of his life into this coherent, amusing, warm-hearted sequence like he did. That whole movie flows so beautifully, and the cast, you talk about an ensemble performance. I mean, his father is a delight. Everyone is a delight in that movie. And so it was a great pleasure to watch. It seems effortless. It seems like it was all just true, and then he wrote it down, which we all know is, of course, not the case.
Well, it's I love the movie as well. I think it's one of the best of the year, and but I think some people kind of misconstrue it. Like I've heard some people say, oh, this is a romantic comedy, and that element is in there. But I actually thought, like, if you think about it, this is the story of the true story of what Kumail Nanjiani went through with the woman he eventually married. She falls into a coma. He spends a very, very long couple of days with her parents. And I almost thought it was kind of a buddy movie with him and the parents. And
oh, yeah.
The chemistry that Kumail Nanjiani has with Holly Hunter and Ray Romano, I think that's priceless.
And a sociological observation, the culture clash is beautifully depicted in that movie. And they don't kind of soft pedal it either.
No. Well, the part where they're talking about 9/11.
Oh, that is a great one. Tell them the line. That is a good line.
Ray Romano says to Kumail Nanjiani, he says, I've always wanted to, talk about 9/11 with one of you people, or words to that effect. And Kumail Nanjiani says, what can I say? We lost some of our best guys. It's just such like. It's about him like turning the tables and like showing like how absurd that like Ray Romano needs to talk to him about this to prove that he's sensitive or whatever.
And I would say that it really shows great screenwriting for Nanjiani to take that chance.
And we should mention he wrote it with his wife.
I didn't even.
I think they co-scripted it. Yeah,
I wasn't cognitive of that, but the fact that he's willing to say, that was a real tragedy. We lost 19 of our best guys. And have that understood in the context of the movie of him just playing with the Ray Romano character and having nothing to do with his actual feeling, I thought was beautiful, and he was absolutely correct that immediately the viewer understands completely what he's saying.
Oh, of course, yeah. Patrick, did you like The Big Sick?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. It's not on my top 5 list, so I'm glad that you brought it up. I would say it's one of the most beautiful screenplays that I've seen in a long time, actually. If you were to just read the synopsis and look at the poster, you'd think, oh man, this looks like a boring, like, what is this, like a rom-com kind of deal?
Right.
But there's a lot of charm in it. When you watch it, and it's a bit unexpected, especially how, like you said, it explores like some real life sociological themes and things like that. There's a lot of depth to it, I think, beyond what you might see with just the plot points,
Yep.
So it was a really nice movie. I enjoyed it.
Well, moving on to a movie that is full of joy and love and fun. I'm gonna drag the spirit down. I'm going to talk about a movie that's filled with death and pain and cynicism. It's a movie that I saw months back. I thought I hated it the first time I saw it, but I was riding my bike home in the dark of night, and suddenly I went, you know what? There's something there. I went back. I saw it again. I was entranced. I've seen it a third time since. It's Darren Aronofsky's Mother, and I felt like an explanation was in order because I on this podcast, in addition to this podcast, I said some very negative things about it, and I said those things, to be honest, out of shock, because what this movie horrified me on such a profound level. But I found, if there's one thing I've found, is that shock can be a distortion of sense and can keep you from seeing a movie's merits, and that was certainly the case here because I've really come to adore this movie. We talked about it before. We talked about the different interpretations. You mentioned, Patrick, the religious allegory and the celebrity critique as well, and you brought up my theory about how it's all a metaphor for global warming, and I think it's a potent movie. That's again, I think you mentioned this, Jim, a sign of its greatness, that it can be all of these things. But I am still very passionate about the global warming argument, because it's, for those of our viewers who don't know the basic story, Jennifer Lawrence is, a homemaker, married to Javier Bardem's narcissistic writer. His fans start coming into the house one by one. Eventually they bring war and anarchy and religious zealotry and all manner of chaos, at which point she has no choice but to burn the house to the ground. And I thought that was a really powerful metaphor for what's happening to this planet, the idea of kind of refracting the very sweeping and almost incomprehensibly massive crisis of climate change through the story of one house and one marriage and one woman who is dealing with things like she tells this guy not to smoke, and the next day it's like, oh, there's a pile of cigarettes in an ashtray right next to his bed, just trying to maintain the control of the situation that's spiraling, beyond anything she can, wrangle. And I know what a lot of our viewers are thinking is, do I sincerely like this movie? Do I actually enjoy this, miserable, devastating, movie where it ends with a baby getting eaten? I mean, and I have to say, yes, I do. I mean, it's a great black comedy. I think the destruction of the house is so maddening and so crazy that it's almost kind of blackly entertaining. The scenes where Jennifer Lawrence over and over again says, please don't sit on that sink, it's not braced yet, and then nope, they sit on it again, they sit on it the third time, they sit on it the fourth time, the next time they sit on it, it explodes and water's pouring out of everywhere. I mean, I think that's a great metaphor, but I think it's also really funny. And then just the climax where we're seeing riots, in this house. We're seeing, a whole religion spring up around Javier Bardem's character. We're seeing a SWAT team storm, through the door. It's like, for one thing, it's like seeing the climax of The Dark Knight Rises taking place in a couple rooms. But for another thing, it's a great, kind of, way of telling the story of, human history and humans creating war, creating religion, creating all manner of evils, creating sexual violence even, because that's a big part of this movie. And I think that last third is very exciting in a suspense action movie kind of way. But I do think at the end of the day, this is a movie a crisis that everyone's going to have to deal with it. And I don't get me wrong, I love An Inconvenient Truth, but when I first saw An Inconvenient Truth, I kind of walked away from that movie thinking well, he talked about some things that are going better, so maybe things are going to be all right. Mother left me feeling so depressed that and I mentioned this in the podcast before, I'm going to mention it again, I had no choice. I felt I got to do more. I'm sitting on my ass while our planet is going to hell. So I started for the first time in years volunteering with the Friends of Trees again, and it's not a whole heck of a lot, but I thought, man, I gotta do something. And I say that not to say, oh, I'm so virtuous, because I'm a flawed, messed up, human being just like anybody else. But I say that as a tribute to Aronofsky as a director, that he made a movie that actually has that effect, that actually gets you to get out of the theater and do something in the real world. And before I stop talking about this, I want to end with a quote he said. He said something to the effect of, I wanted to make a movie about our mother. Not your mother, not my mother, our mother. Because she gives us all these gifts and we treat her like shit. And I think Aronofsky has actually talked about this movie a little too much, and in interviews been kind of analyzing it a bit too much and trying to do viewers' work for them. But in this case, I thought he was spot on, and I think those words sum it up. It's a great movie.
Yeah, I agree. I'm surprised that that Mother is higher on your list than it is on mine, because if I remember when we saw it, I was gleaming. I really enjoyed it.
No, absolutely.
I'm honest with you, you didn't really like it all that much.
No.
I think it's kind of ironic how it's higher on your list than it is.
We switched places. I've had the case with other Aronofsky films. You and I both loved The Fountain. I didn't like The Fountain the first time I saw it either, but it lodged in my mind, and years later I saw it, at a DVD, a used one at Everyday Music. I was like, you know what? Like, I didn't like that when I saw it, but it really intrigued me. Popped into the DVD player, and I was like, wow, I was not ready to appreciate this when I was 15 years old. Now I'm, 18, 19, and I am so ready to appreciate this brand of insanity.
Yeah, it's a measure of his artistry. That's got to be true. I haven't seen it, but it's got to be true. That's artistry right there.
Oh, yeah, no question.
Yeah.
The other thing, the other point I wanted to make, I didn't see too many of Aronofsky's interviews following this movie. I didn't feel that was necessary. I also didn't want to detract from my experience of the film, but I feel like he's not getting enough credit for this movie, actually.
No, absolutely not.
I think he did it really well. The one directorial masterstroke that I found with this movie was how, straight from the beginning, he sets the tone for there's a dis-ease going on. There's an unease going on in the house.
Yes.
The way that this is something that I noticed straight away when we were watching Mother. Is when they were building the scenes, it looked like just like this happy couple like building their house or whatever, and I was thinking like, why is Aronofsky in their faces with the camera? Why is he doing the whole shaky cam thing? It's as if there's an eagerness to exploit the situation. I was like, why is Aronofsky doing this? And then as the film progressed, it just got worse and worse and worse. I was like, oh, okay, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen it again, but if I were to watch Mother again and I notice this, I'll probably start laughing. Because I'm just realizing this now, because I know where it's going.
Sure. You mean realizing the in their faceness, the uncomfortableness, it means things are about to go to hell.
Right, exactly. So I thought that was dissonant the first time, but now that I know where it's going, it's like, oh man, this is a really crazy movie.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, he doesn't get enough credit for what he did. Just talking about it on like a pure craftsmanship level. This is a movie, an entire movie, set in one house with very few characters, with no music at all. With characters who are very vague, who don't even have much personality, and they shouldn't because they're archetypes, they're mythological archetypes. Exactly. Mother Nature, God. They're like many of the characters are figures from the Bible or mythology, and yet you are engaged the whole time. The suspense is built up expertly, bit by bit. The way things just get a little worse. He builds the tension slow, starting with small things like, someone touches a hot pan and gets burned, someone makes a mess and leaves a bunch of lemonade around, a dude just got punched in the head and now he's dead, they're destroying the house, they're looting, they're just smashing things, a baby's being eaten, it escalates just masterfully. And that's part of why it actually is funny, because you can't believe what's happening before your eyes.
I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think it's a type of film that I could see being translated to the stage, and it would be very effective.
Well, Aronofsky says he wants to make an opera, so you make it your wish.
Oh, look.
Yeah. They had a discarded score for the movie by Johan Johansson, who wrote music for Arrival and Sicario, and they weren't able to use it because they felt that music, it was too much. But now they're shouting opera, so we'll see if that comes. Well, we're going into the final stretch of this. We're going to talk about the films that are number 2 on our list. Patrick, do you want to take it away?
Sure. So my number 2 is what we've discussed already. It should not, perhaps not a surprise. It's a little bit of a surprise to me. But Dunkirk is my number 2 on my list.
I don't like that choice. Take it off. I don't like that movie.
Full disclosure, I am a fan. I don't know if I would call... Well, okay, perhaps I should be honest and say that I probably am a fanboy of Chris Nolan for the points that he's usually criticized on. And I probably made this point before, but I felt like this is a film where he grew as an artist, as a filmmaker, and it makes me more excited to see what types of projects that he takes on in the future. But what hasn't been said about Dunkirk already today. So I've seen the film 3 times already, and since I saw it the first time, the biggest criticism I had with it was the way it was pieced together, the editing strategy that they used. Fast forward to the 3rd time that I saw it, I've had maybe 2 months to think about it already, and in fact, by the time I saw it the 3rd time around, it was already a little bit out of my mind, so I kind of saw it with a little bit of fresh eyes, but not exactly. I knew what to expect. But it made me think about the editing differently. I don't know that they purposely, this is what they meant, this is what filmmakers originally meant, but I now consider the editing that they did with the movie to be brilliant, because if you think of the theme of Dunkirk, it's about Dunkirk. It's not the story of one soldier. It's a story of many soldiers. It's a story of that entire situation, that entire world. And as crazy as that situation was, it made sense for the editing to be a bit crazy, where the sense of timing is off. You can't recall what happened first, what happened last.
It's not linear.
Right,
at
it's
all.
not linear at all. And if you were to go back to the veterans who were there, they would recall the story of Dunkirk probably as chaotic as Christopher Nolan presented it. So I thought it was actually brilliant. And when I first saw it, I gave the film 3.5 stars because of that one issue that I had with it. And after the 3rd viewing, it's, to me, easily a 4-star film. And what I first perceived as a problem is actually not a problem at all. It should be a nonlinear story.
I think it's courageous of him to have done that.
Yes, I thought it was very
courageous is the word. Yes, yeah.
I would have to say that this is on par with my other favorite war film, The Thin Red Line. I think.
The Thin Red Line. Isn't that great?
I would have to say that Nolan did Dunkirk just as well as The Thin Red Line.
I just have to talk about the Dunkirk Thin Red Line comparison for a second, because I think it's so fascinating. Like this year I just saw the Thin Red Line for the first time, completely bowled over. I love it. And what I was really struck by was I was thinking about the Thin Red Line in contrast to Dunkirk, and I've always thought of, since I've seen it, the Thin Red Line is a very abstract movie, because it too is not really about one character. It's it's looking at the bigger picture, even war's role in nature as well. And yet I was thinking like, well, but with the Thin Red Line, you actually know a fair bit about some of the characters, and one guy you're even seeing his wife or girlfriend back home in these kind of idyllic, really beautiful flashbacks, and I was thinking, wow. And I don't say this to say that Dunkirk is better, just that it's different. Dunkirk, in a way, is like more like ruthless in being abstract. Like
I agree with that.
You know nothing about these guys, but what they endure on that beach.
Nick Nolte, in some sense, dominates the Thin Red Line. He does a beautiful performance, but there is no similar performance in Dunkirk.
That's a great point.
I mean, everybody is more or less passive, just trying to stay alive. And again, that's gutsy. That he messed with the editing, and it's nonlinear, and it's flashing back, and you have to try to put it together yourself. But that is war. Mm-hmm. That is how it is. Yep. And for it to work as beautifully as it does says something which I have to define as magic about what he can do.
Yeah.
It's difficult to compare it to a lot of other movies, actually. As far as war movies go, because a lot of war movies, generally, especially the war movies, big budget ones, they're very paint by the numbers kind of war movies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What more can you do with it?
True.
And Christopher Nolan just kind of like threw that to the wind.
Tossed it out.
Yeah.
That's why I had some hesitation going to this one, because I thought, does he really have something new to say? Well, it turns out he had a hell lot of new things to say. I mean, but I'm getting into that issue of war films and paint by the numbers. Just one more thing. want to add before we move on is Wonder Woman, not in my top 5. It's a little lower down on my list, but it is one of my favorite films of the year. But it has one trope that I think is really common in war films, which is the moment at the end of the film where, maybe the film's about one part of the war, but at the end they cut to the end of the war and people celebrating in the streets, like giving a sense of tidiness. And I think it's really powerful that Dunkirk avoids those kind of things. And, you end in the midst of the war, these characters don't know that Hitler's going to be defeated. Like all they see, in their future is violence. And, I thought there was something very powerful and primal, like, capturing the idea of World War II not as, history that had an arc, in a beginning, a middle, a conclusion, but as something that, people were actually living for. And I like that, stripping the romanticism away. I think that's very powerful.
Yep.
Jim, you ready to talk about your second favorite movie of the year?
I am, and it's Call Me By Your Name. Call Me By Your Name is a conceit in the movie. These two men, well, one is still a boy, 17, and he falls in love with a 24-year-old man. They are both in Italy. They are both American. They are both Jewish, and I think that is their first bond, that they share the fact that they are clear about alienation, because being Jewish in America as being Jewish in Italy means that you are separate and apart. That's established really early in the film. The way these two men bond is through their wit. It's a clever movie, and both of them are well versed in sarcasm and put downs. And so as they're trying to determine the relative strength of the other person, there's a lot of sparring that goes on. And it's fun to watch that. But what tipped that movie for me, and I really considered making it my number one choice, was the performance of Timothy Chalamet, who is a 21-year-old man, plays the 17-year-old. The movie is his. He dominates it completely. And the dimension and the emotion that he brings to that performance is something that left me slack with awe, because as is so often the case with movies, there are pivot points that if the actor can't reach the emotional pitch necessary to make the movie turn on its axis and keep going towards its ultimate conclusion, then you have a dead movie. But Chalamet has the power to do that. And I want to describe in some detail, I'm going to edit it way down. It's a very erotic scene involving a peach and involving masturbation, where he lovingly takes his finger and penetrates the peach, and at a certain point then decides to masturbate with it. Okay, so that is the explicitness of this one scene. Okay, and so you think, all right, that's erotic, that's cool. But the way it plays out is later in the evening, his older friend, the 24-year-old, comes in and sees the peach and divines what happened. And then, as a joke, he decides to eat the peach. Well, it terrifies him, horrifies him, shames him. His reaction is absolutely not what the audience expects, certainly not what the older guy expects, but it is one of those PowerPoints in the movie where you start understanding the depth of the relationship of these two men, because he is so horrified that this guy would demean him in this way or take it as a joke. I'm not even going to try to go into the psychology of what upset the young guy so much. But his reaction to that idea of his friend eating the peach and the response of the older guy, the tenderness that is the result of that little psychological battle between the two of them, is a measure of the gutsiness and the creativity of this movie, because it takes it beyond anything you'd expect into a dimension of emotion that's probably really true for every relationship that has depth and is likely to last a long time. But the resonance of that scene carries you through the rest of the movie, and you understand exactly how much those guys care for each other.
That's I'm really fascinated listening to you talk about the movie, because I saw it, and I have to confess it didn't affect me nearly the way it's affected most people who have seen it. I wasn't that crazy about it, and so I've been kind of like thinking a lot about like, what is it about this movie that's really gotten to people, and I think you very, very powerfully described it, and I especially like what you said about the peach scene, the notorious peach scene.
Yeah,
that could have been another title for the movie, The Notorious Peach. You were talking about the interplay of the different emotions, and kind of Armie Hammer's character messing with him, and the shame that Chalamet's character feels. Like there's it's really a vortex of feeling that's going on in there.
And in terms of who's the best supporting actor, who's the best actor this year, I just want to say one other thing about that movie. At the end of the movie, something is done that I have never seen before, where...
You're talking about the last shot?
Yeah, where the young man is sitting before a fire, and the camera rolls on this guy for maybe 5 minutes, and he is trying to recover from a recent phone call with the older man, in which he is told that the older guy is going to get married to a woman. That is, their possibility of any kind of relationship is absolutely over. And he is with his family. It's Hanukkah time, it's winter, and he is looking into the fire. And in his face are all of the emotions that you might expect someone to have, trying to process that extremely painful information. Well, the focus of Chalamet in that scene, I mean, it's certainly deserving of some award, because it's phenomenal that he did that. I think the director must have looked at that shot, how can we put this in the movie? It's so long. And the solution was run the credits right to the side.
Yeah. It's the only other time I can think of something like that being done was at the end of Michael Clayton, when George Clooney's in the taxi and the credits are rolling. But this is such a different way of looking at that, because where at the end of that movie you just kind of have moral confusion. Like this is like a mix of, and Call Me by Your Name, like grief and hope and just turmoil. And it's I love thinking about what must have been going through Chalamet's head, just sitting there before the fire for minutes like that.
I just think he has an amazing capacity to focus as an actor, to stay with the emotion for that. I mean, I thought it was a beautiful job that he did, and I hope he has a great career, because he deserves, seemingly, on the basis of that, he has the chops to be a really great actor.
I can't wait to see what he does next, for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, my second favorite movie of the year. It's a movie we talked about earlier, so I'll try to talk about it a little differently. But it is Blade Runner 2049. I've been I would not say I've been a fan, but I've been fascinated by Denis Villeneuve for a while. I remember I saw Prisoners when it came out in 2013, which is a kidnapping movie he did with Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal and Paul Dano. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And the reason I hated it was because I thought it was like one of those kind of hipply cynical movies that sort of exist like just to show like how tough and bleak the director can get and how he knows the ugly side of life. And, it's just based on that movie, I think I felt, it's like, wow, this is a director who, like has nothing to offer but just like pain and bitterness. And, certainly those are important ingredients in a lot of movies, but they can't be the only thing. And yet at the same time, it was a movie that, I certainly didn't forget. It stayed with me, and so I kept going to see his films. And I saw Arrival last year, and finally I found what I was looking for in him, which was a movie that, confronts some, incredibly painful things. It's a film about, a mother knowing that she's going to, lose her daughter, essentially, and yet having the strength to still be hopeful, to still persevere. And so I got from him, I think what I was looking for, which was honesty and a willingness to look away from painful things, but also, a willingness to believe, to not be afraid to be too sentimental or too optimistic. And that comes to the fore again in Blade Runner 2049. As I mentioned before, I've seen the original a lot, but I don't, regard it as sacrosanct. I don't think it's perfect by any means, and I have some issues with Ridley Scott, in general, which that's a whole nother podcast. But what I love about Blade Runner 2049 is that it takes sort of this trope, the idea of in a dystopian future, a detective hunting for illegal androids essentially, and turns it on its head by having that character not be this cold, cynical, jaded guy, but have him be a wooden Pinocchio who wants to be a real boy. Have him be a Tin Man who feels incomplete without a heart. And instead of being about a quest for answers, it's about his quest to try to become human. And I love how that evolves. It starts out with him wondering and believing that maybe he's the first replicant to have been born from a woman, not made, and how that makes him feel special. He has this line where he says, to be born is to have a soul, I guess. And he feels somehow that if he's born, if he has that distinction, he matters more, he's more real. And also, if he's the only born replicant, then that gives him this kind of special status among replicants. It makes him, a chosen one, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, like Neo in The Matrix. It confers this kind of importance. And the movie goes on an incredible journey, which is the journey of him finding out that he's not nearly as important as he would like to believe. And once he realizes that, he has to decide, what can I do now? And his answer is, I can, connect with someone in a meaningful way. I can do something for somewhere else. You asked about lines in this movie, Jim, that are memorable. Another line that I think is memorable is a character tells him dying for a cause is the most human thing we can do, and he takes that to heart. He takes to heart the idea of that, to do something for someone else, out of selfless love. That is what it is to be human. And that's why I think this is a lot more than just a cool-looking movie, although, god damn it, it's really damn cool-looking. I mean, the pink towering hologram in this, shadowy, nightmarish rainy city. I mean, wow, it is a visual tour de force, and it's got that kind of quirky mysticism of the original film, like where you'll have strange moments like, a dog staring out a window at, 2 cars or 3 cars soaring to the sky. Why is that in there? Well, it's in there to create this aura of strangeness that's very poetic and entrancing. But more than that, this is a film that's not just about, beautiful images, and it's not even just about science fiction or artificial intelligence. It's about, the quest that, all humans have to undertake, which is, how do I reach people? How do, I connect to people? How do, I relate to friends, to lovers, to, mentor figures? It's a very primal and emotional thing, and, that's why it's so high on my list and why I've seen it 3 times now. Can't wait to watch it again, and, it's...
Wow.
I don't know what to say to Denis Villeneuve except thank you. You gave us quite a vision, and I can't wait to see his version of Dune if that ever gets off the ground.
Yeah. Well, what surprises me about Blade Runner 2049, and I agree that it was a very well shot movie. It's visually stunning. What surprises me is how I've heard some criticisms about this movie that they use that aspect to criticize Denis Villeneuve as well. In the first place, a lot of the commentary that I've read about this, they like to compare Denis Villeneuve with Ridley Scott, and I guess it's a fair comparison considering they both made the films. And as I said earlier, I prefer how Denis Villeneuve brought me into this world more than Ridley Scott. Anyways. In terms of this visual aspect of the film, I don't think Denis Villeneuve's direction or brilliance in fleshing out this world was too reliant on the visuals. If you were to take away some of the modern technology in terms of CGI and things like that, if you were to take that away from Denis Villeneuve, I have a feeling that he would have created just as effective a film as Ridley Scott did. Back in those days, and that level of technology. So it's a little odd for me to hear people criticize Villeneuve as if he's depending on visual techniques to flesh out this world. I don't think that's a very fair criticism.
I agree, and I think that's a great point. And one thing I want to mention about the difference between Scott and Villeneuve is that, Scott is a very instinctual director. I think he does things exactly when he wants to do them. He made 2 movies in 1 year. In 2017, Alien Covenant and All the Money in the World, and I think he often kind of leaps without looking, and that gives his movies a certain vibrance, a certain sense of surprise, that an inspiration that I think is really great. And Villeneuve is more methodical. His movies are more like carefully planned. Like, I don't think he goes into a movie without knowing why he wants to make it. I think he always thinks very deeply about whatever theme he's trying to get across. And that means that, this, new Blade Runner doesn't have the same, oh wow, I've never seen anything like that before, spark of the first one. But it does mean, because it's better thought out, and in my opinion, better written, you do have a more emotional story, where you feel like you are with this main character, Gosling's character, and I think, it's a trade-off, because I think, a lot of people understandably would say, well, the freshness, the inspiration, maybe that's more important, and I can understand that as well, but 2049 did affect me more, so.
Well, now that I think about it, I think probably why I was drawn to 2049 more than the original was, I just think the characters in 2049 are just more interesting than the characters that Ridley Scott had in the first movie. I think that has a lot to do with it.
No, there's a great variety of characters, and I didn't mention them before, but I mean, got to mention Sylvia Hex is the replicant, hunting Gosling. You got to mention Robin Wright as his boss, who's just this smoldering, amoral but kind of lovable character. You got to mention Ana de Armas, who plays the holographic girlfriend Joy. I mean, such a beautiful, fascinating, even kind of troubling character, because is she real, is she not, is she sentient? It plays around with that ambiguity so well, but it's a great ensemble. Shall we move in? Sorry.
No. You're just bringing a lot of memories for me. Isn't it just kind of ironic how you're saying K, an artificial intelligence, having a companion who's also an artificial intelligence? It's just a weird. I don't know if you would call it a commentary about us, you know, it's kind of like double mirrors or something, like humans watching fake humans or something.
That's a great point, and I love the idea that like they're both artificial intelligence, you know, an android and a hologram. But you know,
I mean, is this a real relationship?
Yeah, is it? And
it's like artificial human.
Yeah, and it's like, well, and there are different like levels, like, you know, like Kay is seen as a second-class citizen, but Joy is seen as a third-class citizen because somehow, even though they're both artificial, somehow a hologram is seen as less than a robot. And I think that's a really brilliant commentary on, like, you know, the way bigotry works in the real world, because, you know.
And there are no animals in this universe.
Well, she's not corporeal, right? I mean, she doesn't have an actual body.
She's literally a projection.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And, I mean, of course, I mean, you know.
So obviously she's third class.
Right. And then, you know, and there's the world of the film, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and then, of course, we have to mention now, you know, one of the best scenes is a scene where she wants to make love to her owner. So she brings in a prostitute and, you know, superimposes herself over this prostitute. And suddenly you've got this, like, weird three-way sex scene where he's making love to this, you know, strange, you know, woman who's a composite of this woman he barely knows and his fake electronic girlfriend. Yeah. And it's like when it's over, you know, there's, you know, the girlfriend Joy, you know, she feels like this kind of bitterness because as much as she tries to recreate it, like, it's not the real thing, and, you know, it's.
Where do you buy the software for this?
Well, apparently you buy it from the Wallace Corporation.
Right. Well, that's good to know.
Just go over to Jared Leto. You know, I'm sure he can hook you up.
He can hook me up. Yeah.
All right, we are going to talk about our number one picks, our absolute favorite films of the year now. Let's not waste any time. Patrick, what is your favorite movie of 2017?
There's a little bit of a plot twist here. The last movie that I talked about, Dunkirk, was actually my top film for many months, many weeks, actually, until I kept coming across this one, the $1,000,000 question. The $1,000,000 question: is Dunkirk the movie that I'm gonna remember 2017 by? Is it even my favorite movie of the year? And actually, no. For 2017, I thought a lot of the films were. I mean, even though the films that I really enjoyed were really spot on and really well done, they were really bleak. You know, like Mother, Dunkirk.
I don't know why you thought Mother was bleak, but, you know, go on.
But is this how I'm going to remember 2017? And the answer is no. So at risk of my credibility, my number one film of 2017 is Last Jedi.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
And I'm probably the only. Well, I wouldn't call myself a big reviewer or anything, but I doubt anybody is going to have The Last Jedi as their top film. But there's where would I even start with that? Well, for starters, when I go back to that $1,000,000 question, what is the one movie that I'm going to remember 2017 the most by? And with Dunkirk and Blade Runner very high up there, The Last Jedi is at the top of my list. It's by no means is it the perfect film. As I said at the start of this podcast, I kind of had a shadow list where I was thinking about the craft of filmmaking itself, and The Last Jedi doesn't even make it on my on that list in terms of filmmaking. But for me personally, my favorite film of the year and the film that I'm going to remember the year by will still be The Last Jedi.
I mean, one thing I just want to like probe a bit, and like, because do you? I mean,
I know this is a bit of a plot twist.
No, and that's not why I'm saying like probe it. And by the way, I love plot twists. So I'm glad you chose it. But I'm just curious. You know, I want to talk about, you know, you're saying, you know, it's the film you're going to remember the year for. Like, are you saying that in terms of like, you know, you think it's the one, you know, you'll watch the most in later years? You think it's the one that moved you the most? It's the one that was, you know, the most like satisfying, like as an experience of witnessing a story that really affected you, or?
The answer might surprise you as it surprises me, but the answer is yes to all of your questions.
Okay.
I found it satisfying. Everything. My answer is a resounding yes to all of your questions, which is why it made the top of my list.
Was it the narrative that gratified you? How did you become so gratified? Can you point at the reasons for that?
I like where they're taking the series creatively. At a production level, I think Rian Johnson made a lot of brave decisions, and I would have to credit Disney for allowing him to take the decisions he did. There's a lot of criticism directed at this movie, and I could see where those criticisms are coming from. But I would have to side with the filmmakers and the decisions that they made, and I thought they made the right decisions.
So you felt fulfilled leaving the theater because of the whole of it, the aggregate, the performances, and
yes, production-wise and in terms of the creative storytelling, I like the decisions that they made with it.
So it enveloped you. Is
yes,
that
for sure.
proper to say? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the problems that I do have with it are minor in comparison to what I thought they did right.
This movie has become kind of an interesting touchstone for our whole team, because I think, like the viewers, we've been very divided. We did 2 podcasts about it, and Patrick and Max Myers and Moshe all really liked it, and me and Hannah McGrath Purdue both had our lightsabers out. But it's been such a really great discussion. I even think there are discussions now about the way people are discussing the film, and I'll, as you know, because I ranted about it in the last podcast, I personally am not a fan of The Last Jedi, but you are right. There are risks, and they've given rise to a discussion that I think has been very fun to see play out. Even though I don't care for the film as a whole. I mean, a lot of those risks I quite like. I like the revelation and quote of Rey's parents. I thought that was a great twist on the Star Wars lore of You're Something Special, and it's actually kind of like Blade Runner 2049. She goes on a journey where she has to define herself by her actions, not her heritage, and I think that's quite powerful.
Well, I'm also, in a lot of ways, I'm also speaking as a fanboy, right? I guess the fans are divided in terms of where they're taking this whole storyline series. I guess I'm just on the on that opposite side, where I agree with the decisions that they were making with it. So there's that.
Not necessarily as part of the archival reality of the whole Star Wars Uber. That's not what you're saying. You're saying as a specific.
You mean as a
film?
Both.
You say you weren't being a fanboy in the sense that, oh yeah, this fits in the whole. That's a great choice. It's not what you're saying. I'm understanding, or I believe. I'm just trying to clarify. You're saying that this movie itself took you in, and you lived in it and left
Yes,
the theater.
yeah.
Feeling great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
I'm surprised with myself at how much I enjoyed it. I didn't think I would, because I was a bit meh with Force Awakens. and
You and me both.
When I saw it, like at your place with you and Mo,
Right.
I was even more meh. and when I see it today, I'm like okay, this is not, I don't really care so much. But the twist where Rian Johnson were taking the characters, I agree with it, and it made for an entertaining film. To me, anyways.
Did we talked about Rey, the Daisy Ridley character. And you, what about like John Boyega and Oscar Isaac, because those have been like controversial character arcs, but you liked those as well, right?
So, well, this is another problem that I have with it. So, this is kind of funny that I would call this my favorite movie of the year because there's a whole lot of problems. And this, one of the problems that I have with it is I think they tried to maybe cram a little too many characters with it. But I think that's just kind of an effect of Star Wars being this giant commercial enterprise thing.
Sure,
And
it's a vast toy box to play with, a vast canvas.
I kind of feel like they're shoehorning all these characters in, like Phasma and Holdo, just to kind of sell the other material, the comic books and the light
Licensing.
novel.
It's a big deal.
Those kind of things. But altogether, as a film, you could see that as a problem. But altogether, I felt like Rian Johnson created this 2.5-hour elaborate cartoon almost. Like I felt like I was a 10-year-old watching a cartoon, and I like that. I think that's what it's supposed to be, also, in my opinion. So for him to have done that, I think that just really worked for me.
I'll just say one more thing before we move on. That even though I don't like The Last Jedi in particular, like you were talking about what movie are you going to remember the year by, and like I got to say sometimes nothing beats a movie like this, where you become just really engrossed. I have in the past, chosen movies like this, for my favorite film of the year because, I love, escaping into a world with characters that I care about, going on an exciting adventure. That's why I loved Abrams' first Star Trek. That's why I love the Dark Knight Rises, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, and that's a very special experience those kinds of movies give you. And I know you said some self-deprecating stuff about putting The Last Jedi at number one, but I don't think that's anything to backtrack on. I mean, you gotta choose the movie that gave you the best experience. That's called being a good critic. I think that's what you got to do.
This is probably the first year that I've made kind of two lists. On my second list, The Last Jedi is not even on it at all.
Really? What tops that list?
Dunkirk was
okay.
top of that list, and at the fourth or fifth spot or something, I put Killing of the Sacred Deer.
Oh, really? Oh,
but otherwise, my top four is the same. But yeah, I feel like I'm doing something different this year. I'm going with the film that I'm going to remember 2017 the most, I think. So.
Well, I appreciate. As I said, I do like a good plot twist. So, thank you for bringing it in, Jim. What's your favorite movie of the year?
It's funny. I'm making a different decision than Patrick in terms of the pleasure of the movie that I'm choosing as number one, because the first time I saw Get Out, it upset me a lot, and I actually thought that I would never see it again, because I have friends who have suffered precisely the kind of discrimination that's being alluded to in a very dramatic way, admittedly, in the plot of Get Out. But I know that the suffering is real, and I had never seen it so clearly put out there on screen before. And so it agitated me, and because I believe with my entire soul that perspective that's in the movie is correct, that white racism is that prevalent and that pernicious in American society that there's nowhere for me to go in that movie. And it was hard to watch and hard to keep in mind afterwards. But strangely, and I don't know why, I decided to watch it again And when I did, I saw to my relief what my agitation had prevented me from seeing in the movie, and that is the beauty of the movie, the sheer artistry of his insight and what he was able to put on the screen came through. And one of the things that's extremely powerful in that movie to me is that most of the black actors, or many of the black actors in the movie, are mimicking elderly white people, because that's part of the plot. Because somehow the brain surgeon in this mansion is transferring into virile black bodies the minds of elderly white people. And that's horrendous conceit of the movie.
It's a very eerie thing to see, like when you see, like, you know, it's like a different voice, speaking through these people.
Yes.
It's quite chilling.
Exactly, and he nailed it so beautifully that when you look at these young people, male and female, the maid is a great example. When you realize that she is not talking like a black person, she's talking like a woman, a white woman somewhere in her late 70s or 80s. And what's more, she's in denial of the horror that she's participated in, which is subsuming these other personalities for her own good into extending her life in this horribly selfish way. And so when I saw the artistry, when I saw what he was able to do to burlesque white people in that way, that was one thing that mitigated the pain of the movie for me. But the other thing is, by the end of the movie, watching it again, I could see with great clarity that at least within the confines of the world depicted in the movie, the bad guys got punished. I mean, they really do pay for their crimes in a way which in real life they never do.
Well, I think it's really interesting. Jordan Peele, he had two endings, and there was one that was a really bleak option, and the one with a little bit of hope with the friend pulling up in the TSA car at the end.
I didn't realize. I think maybe I read about that. Tell me about that. They did. Yeah. Was that ever in the theater?
So, here's the interesting thing. So two endings. One ending was the one that ended up in the movie. The other ending was Chris, the Daniel Kaluuya character. After he's escaped by being forced to kill Catherine Keener, Bradley Whitford et al. The police show up and arrest him for murder, and so that obviously that would have been like a very honest ending. Him a young black guy being hauled away for a crime he
and
really
a very
didn't
dark
commit.
ending given the context of that movie.
But I think the ending they ended up with gives you the satisfaction of a rescue, but it's also the chill hangs in the air because the horror of the racism is
and I mean, it doesn't actually tie up all the loose ends. There is still the man who utters the line, "Get out."
Yes.
That black guy has not been rescued. And so who knows what's going to happen to him. But within the confines of the movie, I suppose you just have to let that one go. I ended up being affected by that movie, and if one judges one's favorite by how long one is going to be remembered, I know that for a fact that one is going to stay with me. It was just really powerful. I thought Daniel Kaluuya, of the two, Timothy Chalamet, who did a wonderful job in Call Me By Your Name, and Daniel Kaluuya in Get Out, I It's close, but I'd give it to Kaluuya. As that is a painful performance, but one with a great deal of humor and clarity and honesty. I like what he did in that movie.
Patrick, did you see Get Out?
Not yet. I'm actually, I think in some way I'm a little terrified to watch it.
Sure,
It's hard
sure.
because
Yeah.
it's hard to watch.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll be
because of
honest, I had to
everything
watch
that
it on DVD. Yeah, I was too scared to see the movie.
Right, because of everything that I've heard about it. But I feel like it's a movie that I should see. But no, I haven't. So I only know it from, recollections from you guys or others.
One thing I'll say that I wish someone had told me before I saw it was that it's really not a horror film. I mean, it's really
Not
closer
really.
to Hitchcock and suspense thriller. It's and that's one reason I think Jordan Peele is such an admirable director. Just actually kind of like Aronofsky. And interestingly, Jordan Peele is a very big fan of Mother. Peele really builds tension like very expertly, very bit by bit. A drop and then another drop, and then it turns into a pool that feels like it's going to drown everybody. It's a great example of craft, aside from being just, I think, one of the best concepts ever come up with for a
No,
movie,
it's a beautiful concept. I mean, the very idea of the movie, and then to bring it to fruition with the clarity that he did. And honestly, he amassed this great number of older white actors to play these roles, and they just seem perfect to me.
Yeah.
And then the way it's written so that these young black actors are parroting the diction of old white people so beautifully. The formality of their speech when they're talking to Daniel Kaluuya and trying to be friendly, but in fact they're elderly white people in these black bodies, and so it rings utterly false, everything that they say to him. And one beauty in his acting is how his face registers, because he doesn't understand what's going on, his stunned reaction to the way they're talking to him, because it's so divorced from any kind of reality, which Jordan Peele may have been making that point too.
It's a fascinating movie, and you're right. I think everybody's seen it is going to remember it for quite a long time. And for what it's worth, I think it's going to win Best Picture. I think it's the zeitgeist movie of the year, and I think we're gonna see Peele on stage at the Dolby Theater or wherever they're doing it this year.
Man. That would be great.
All right, it's time for the final salvo. My favorite film of the year. You mentioned picking a film that you felt had some issues, Patrick. I also picked a film that's imperfect. And in fact, it's a film that you and I talked a lot about. Its imperfections, but I find choosing a favorite movie of the year to be almost kind of a sacred thing. And usually, I just simply think, what moved me the most, what entertained me the most, what thrilled me the most. Whatever movie covers those fields, I pick it. But I thought this was an extraordinary year. Forget a top 10. I had almost enough for a top 20 this year. It was an embarrassment of riches. And so, for the first time in a long time, I actually struggled. But I thought, okay, I got to pick a movie that's not only a great piece of art, because by that criteria, any number of films could have topped my list. It has to be a movie that affected me on a gut level, and also a movie that says something about the world, about life that I truly believe. For me, there's only one movie that fits that description, and it's Terrence Malick's Song to Song. Okay. So for our viewers who may not know much about the movie, or listeners, they may not know much because it only played in Portland in one theater for 2 weeks or something. It's set in Austin, Texas. It's about two musicians played by Rooney Mara and Ryan Gosling who are in love, and they're doing fairly well, but they're not nearly where they want to be. So they make a deal with the devil to advance their careers. They get involved with this music mogul played by Michael Fassbender brilliantly, I might add. This rich, sleazy guy, who's always surrounded by drugs and prostitutes, and sums up his view of the world. And what I think is a great line, he says, "Everything is for sale." He lives by those words. And the movie is about his quote-unquote friendship with Mara and Gosling's characters, and it chronicles how something happens midway through the film that splits them apart, and then Malick follows them as they go off on their separate adventures, and their lives continue. That's the plot of the movie. That doesn't even begin to tell you what watching this movie is like. In the traditional Malick style, it's a stream of consciousness film, where you're seeing some traditional dialogue scenes, but also just lots of fragments of moments that wash over you and rush past you. 1 minute you might be at a Patti Smith concert, or watching Val Kilmer on stage going ballistic and sawing an amp in half with a chainsaw. The next minute you might be with Ryan Gosling and Rooney Mara, running underneath an underpass, or just watching a swan float on a river. It's a visual tour de force, and there's so much wondrousness to behold. But beyond that, it's a great love story. It's about these two people who love each other deeply, but they compromise their love by trying to get ahead, by getting involved with Fassbender's character to get what they want out of their careers, and how that destroys their relationship, how it poisons everything they hold dear. And yet Malick does something really beautiful, which all of the characters, he gives them a second chance. He gives them a chance at redemption, and unlike a lot of his films of late, all of which I also love, they end sometimes on an air of inconclusiveness, where there's a lot of pain and the characters just have to live with it. This is a movie that brings a sense of completion, which I think is really fitting, because he's he's leaving behind this world of contemporary love stories, and he's doing a World War II movie next, going back to the milieu of the Thin Red Line. And so I think it's fitting that this feels like the ending of a cycle. But more than that, it's just a beautiful, beautiful movie that isn't afraid to be sentimental, isn't afraid to be earnest, wears its emotions on its sleeve, and then some. And if there's a moment that sums up the movie and how I feel about it, it's the last line and the last shot. The last shot of the movie is Ryan Gosling and Rooney Mara lying together with their arms around each other on a rocky expanse in the middle of the nowhere while the sun shines down at them. And she says in voiceover, "This, only this." And I think that's just such a beautiful, beautiful thing to say, and such a beautiful statement to make about what matters to these characters, what they care about. And it sums up as well how I feel about Malick. There are few directors, who have moved me, who have gotten to me, who have made me cry out with joy the way his films have. And so I got to say, for me, Malick movies, I'm going to quote Rooney Mara: "This, only this," and that's why Song to Song is my favorite movie of the year.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
I think your experience with Song to Song is probably on par with my experience tonight of Cups. With that said, how would you rank this in comparison to the previous three?
Oh, that is tough. Of the previous three, this is the first one that I put in my number one slot. So, and this is one that I've loved it more and more with each viewing. So I'm tempted to say Song to Song is my favorite he's done recently. But it's really really
Yeah,
tough because To the Wonder, I mean,
Right.
was
It might be
just.
an unfair question. I don't know that you could really rank them per se.
But it's absolutely worth thinking about, and it becomes increasingly complicated because this movie was shot back to back with Knight of Cups. It's a duology about like kind of love in a creative world. Knight of Cups was about the film industry. This is about the music industry. So I mean, I almost want to say that it's really a two-part film in a way. Although I know that's kind of cheating, because
No, I
they're
could kinda
very
see that,
different
actually.
worlds.
Because in a lot of ways, I felt like Song to Song was almost like a continuation of Knight of Cups.
Absolutely, yeah. It's building upon.
But yes, going into the music world as opposed to the film world.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because like I always assumed that I knew both of these were coming because he started shooting these a long time ago and was just tinkering for years and years and years trying to get them both right. I always assumed I would prefer Knight of Cups like by a long shot just because I'm so steeped in movies. Honestly, I don't really have that much time to keep up with the latest music trends or anything. So, but I gotta say, it's something about the characters and Song to Song and just the charisma of Fassbender of this devilish, seductive guy who's always dancing around and makes people love him even though they know they shouldn't. And Gosling is this who's blurring the line as kind of this tough guy who goes hunting, but who's also really sensitive and will like try on a woman's leopard print shirt, and then Rooney Mara. I was very lukewarm on her performance the first time I saw it, and the more I watch it, the more I really admire her skill and like how she rolls with like Malik's improvisational style he's been doing lately. Just there's this great bit where Gosling keeps like poking her with a blade of grass, like trying to get her to smile, and the way she like reacts to that, it's really natural and beautiful and profound. Can't say enough good things. I mean,
Yeah, I think the acting all around was very good.
yes.
What would you call like from not To the Wonder, the one with Brad Pitt? What is the title again?
Oh, The Tree of Life. Yes.
From Tree of Life to Song. Well, how would you compile this this period of Malik?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think to answer that properly, I want to go a little bit into his whole history. Like so, so Badlands, Days of Heaven, The Thin Red Line, The New World. His first 4 films, all period pieces. He really was obsessed like with the idea of going to another time, of transporting us there. But doing it with spontaneity and grit and humanity in a way that didn't feel starchy like period pieces often do.
Right.
But then he makes The Tree of Life, which is set partly in the past, partly in the present, and I feel like it represents his passage from being a storyteller of history to being a guy who's very interested in contemporary stories and contemporary romance and also in contemporary architecture, because those towering skyscrapers were a very important part of The Tree of Life, and that becomes a motif in these later films as well. So I think The Tree of Life was like kind of like a gateway movie. Then To the Wonder, you have him fully in the present, just telling this very ordinary and yet somehow extraordinary and poetic story about one couple, one marriage, in a house in the suburbs of Oklahoma. And then you get a similar thing with Knight of Cups, where he's getting rid of history. He's going to the story of one guy in the film industry, and I feel like that allowed him to be a bit freer. Like, because Malik has always been radical, but when I watch his older films now, when I watch like Days of Heaven or The Thin Red Line, I realize they almost feel like compared to what he's doing now, conventional, even though they're very, they really push the envelope, but they're a bit clearer, they're a bit easier to understand, where he just keeps getting more and more abstract, and to the point where you have a film like Knight of Cups, where I have a theory that at the root of that film is the death of Christian Bale's character's mother, but I don't know that for sure. It's very nebulous, and I like that. I like the idea of it's a puzzle. It's a world you're kind of floating around in a swimming pool, like reaching for bubbles, trying to piece them together into a picture. And I think the Tree of Life was like really the beginning of all of that. And he's moving on from that now. With his next film, he's sticking to the script, and I don't think that's a response to people's reactions to his films. I think he's like any good artist in that he wants to challenge himself. He doesn't want to get stuck in a rut, and I can respect that. All if I'm being entirely honest, I'm gonna miss this abstract improvisational period because I think it's been really really beautiful, and I think it came to a great climax and so on and so on.
It's almost as if with these 4 films, he's experimenting with a more jazzy style of filmmaking.
Yeah.
He's trying to really capture that forever elusive present without it becoming too much of a memory. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just kind of thinking about his directing style and the editing style, and how I think a lot of the footage that he actually used wasn't totally scripted. It wasn't like screenplayed to death.
There was no script.
It was just actors acting, being like purely in these roles.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's a really unique type of storytelling.
Yeah.
And when you mix in what I forget his name now, the cinematographer.
Oh, Emmanuel Lubezki. Yeah.
What Lubezki was also doing, it's as if they're really bringing you into this world, but not in the usual sense of filmmaking.
No.
But like the best way I can put it is like a jazz style of filmmaking. Like when you're listening to jazz music, you know that the artists are inspired with the sound at that very moment.
Sure.
It's not like listening to a recording of it. And I feel like Malik is trying to capture that experience in film form, the way jazz musicians create music, with sound.
Yeah.
That's what it seems to me.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, and just the kind of fluidity of that. Like there's a great part in the middle of the movie where Mara and Gosling's characters have broken up, and you just see these kind of like empty landscapes, like a beach, and just like it's kind of illustrating sort of the isolation that they're feeling, and it is. I think it is very jazzy because it's kind of going by not like a language of this happens and this happens and this happens, like going of a language that's more impressionistic and like quick. Like how do we capture what they're feeling? Because we don't have to just shoot the scene. Like we can we can do something different. We can show a shot of waves surging somewhere to like communicate an emotion here, and it's very free and just have to talk about one brilliant thing Lubezki did. He got my favorite shot of the year in this movie, which is a shot of them driving through downtown Austin. The camera's right behind the car, following the car as it swerves through traffic, like making you feel like you're gliding with the car, like moving along the road, and it's just like
it's a pretty striking shot.
It is, yeah. I mean, just the effect that his movies have on your body. I mean, this is. I almost liken it to blockbuster cinema because there's a lot of stuff where you're like, oh wow, it brings you back to the experience of being in a dark theater and being filled with just awe at what movies can do. And I love that.
Well, I didn't see that coming. I didn't think that would be your number one.
I didn't think it would.
Another plot twist.
I know. No, we're getting really, really twisty. It's I only recently came to that conclusion. But did some introspection. And did a little Siddhartha style soul searching to work it out. And shall we wrap it up?
Sure.
You guys all movied out?
Sure. We could use some food.
Oh, me too. Yeah. The perfect way to end a great year at the movies. Well, thank you all for listening to this podcast about our favorite movies of 2017. Remember, this is just the beginning of the journey. This is part one. I'm also going to be talking in part two of this with Maxwell Myers, Hannah McGrath Purdue, Mo Shawnette about their favorite films of the past year, and some more of mine that you have not heard about yet if you're listening. And also, got to do the usual rigmarole. If you like this podcast, please click thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at T.H.O Movie Reviews, and remember to check out all the great content and reviews we have at thomoviereviews.wordpress.com. Once again, thank you all for joining us. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson. I'm here with Jim Newman. I'm here with Patrick Belin. And from all of us here at T.H.O Movie Reviews, happy movie watching.